Okay, I wanted to make this video talking about one of my best purchases I ever made to make YouTube videos, and that's the Sony A6400 camera. Now this camera is amazing for a lot of reasons. It has amazing autofocus, very good low light performance, and one of the best things is it has amazing color science. And color science is like what makes the image look good, look real, look natural. You'll see a lot of people say that Canon has like amazing color science, and really what they mean by that is it's oversaturated and over contrasted. So it doesn't have a very good dynamic range, and it almost looks like a cartoon. It looks a little bit too vivid, too unnatural, and I hated it, honestly. So Sony, especially this particular camera and their newer models, have really good color science, which means it looks extremely natural, and yeah, it just looks really good. So I looked at, before I bought this camera, I looked at all the different brands, their color science, their autofocus performance, their low light performance, and this camera and Sony cameras in general, stood out by quite a large margin. So what makes this camera a end game, especially streaming camera or YouTube camera, is its ability to do 1080p 60 frames per second. Even if you buy like a full frame multi-$1,000 Sony camera, it's going to struggle to do 4K 60 frames per second. A lot of people take 60 frames per second for granted. Some people even want to use 24 frames per second because they think it looks like a movie, or 30 frames per second because they think that's like the standard YouTube, frame rate. But especially gamers appreciate 60 frames per second because they know that fluid, even, much higher frame rates than 60 frames per second really make video games look a hell of a lot better. And when you use it to record any type of video, 60 frames per second looks a whole lot more lifelike. So, if you buy a camera, a Sony camera for, $3,000, $4,000 that recently came out, they still struggle to do 4K 60 without cropping the sensor, because they're getting better, but there still is something called a rolling shutter, which means that the camera cannot technically read the sensor fast enough to do 8K 60 frames per second. So it's really technically still hard to do, 4K 60 frames per second, which means that you can spend a whole lot less money and just focus on 1080p 60, which is sufficient for YouTube. And that this camera combined with like a capture card that can do 1080p 60, you can now turn your camera into a webcam. And so again, why would you want this external Sigma lens? This camera came with this lens. The stock lens that it comes with actually has screwed up autofocus. It has terrible low light performance. So this lens is actually really crappy. So you want to get this wide aperture lens, the Sigma 16mm f1.4. This is a wide aperture lens, which means it takes in a lot of light, which means it has incredible low light performance, which is what you're looking for indoor recording. And it's for close up. It's a wide aperture lens allows you to have the camera very close to you without it like zooming in too much. So this is a good, like, if the camera's like, 4 feet away from you or something, it performs really good. It's, some lenses will zoom in too much and that means you have to have the camera farther away from you, which is obviously a problem. So yeah, this lens, 16 millimeter, is really good for having the camera a few feet away from you, so that you can even reach it and adjust it when needed and stuff without having it too far away. Okay, so why do you want this lens? It has, again, this lens has really bad autofocus performance. You'll actually notice like wobble around the perimeter of the screen, kind of like it wobbling if you use this. Okay, so yeah, lenses are actually important. There's a reason why people spend $1,000 on just a lens. These cheapo lenses can cause a lot of problems. So I would recommend you just buy the body of the camera. Okay. So again, why would you want this Sony camera? It's 1080p, 60 frames per second performance. It's color science. It's low light performance. Can you do better? Can you spend multiple thousands of dollars to get a better camera? Technically you can, but you're basically not going to have any benefit besides trying to get to that 4K resolution, 60 frames per second goal. And those more expensive cameras struggle to even achieve that. And again, you can't stream at 4K, so if you're a streamer, or you just you don't want massive file sizes to work with, 1080p is the standard. 60 frames per second adds that additional fluidness, and you'll see a lot of people using that for like ASMR and stuff, and streaming 60 frames per second. It's a lot more fluid. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn the camera on. Okay, and so if we look at this, we can see at the bottom here it says 1.25. That's the shutter rate. So you want the shutter to be twice that of the frame rate. So since the frame rate on my camera is 60 frames per second, we have the shutter. Why is it not focusing? We have the shutter at 125. 125. Okay. And then again, we have the aperture at f1.4, which allows you to have a lot of background bokeh, as well as, it takes in a lot of light. So now we can see the ISO is blinking right here at 6,000. It turned off. So we can see oh my God, it's not focused. It says 6,400 right there. It's blinking because I have the lens cap on. Now if I take the lens cap off, we will see the ISO is only 200 ISO. 250 ISO. That's incredibly good. The ISO is the camera compensating for low light problems, which increases grain and decreases the image quality. So the higher the ISO, the worse it is. So you want it to be in the low 100s if possible, and that's going to give you a really crisp and clear image without any grain. And the last thing to really consider is the white balance. The white balance is like the main thing that you want to get right on a camera, because if the white balance is off, then it's going to look really bad. So you always want to use like a custom white balance And don't use auto white balance, because auto white balance will, over the course of a video, fluctuate, and you'll actually see the colors of the image shifting. So, if you want it to look like, someone is looking through a window into your room, you don't want the white balance or the autofocus adjusting. So you could disable autofocus, you could disable white balance and use a custom white balance. And that's what I am doing. I'm using a custom white balance. So the white balance does not change over time. So those are pretty much the only things you need to know about this camera. Is you want the shutter rate to be twice as much as your frame rate. So if you're recording at 60 frames per second, you want the shutter to be 125. You want the aperture to be as low as possible. So you want, like a f1.4 aperture camera to let in more light and to give you that background bokeh, background blur that a lot of people like. Again, you want like a 16 millimeter lens, so the camera does not have to be like really far away from you, because it'll zoom in too much. So this camera lens that it comes with, you can see it does have the ability to it's just not going to focus at all. But this lens, we can see it. It does 3.5 to 5.6. Blah blah blah. So this lens you can actually zoom in. 3.5 to 5.6, or 16 millimeter to 15 millimeter. That's what I was looking for. It's just not 16 millimeter to 50 millimeter, I guess. That's what it means, right? So this lens can zoom in, which you don't need to do for a indoor streaming camera. So this lens cannot zoom. Okay. So anyway, I think that's it for this video. This thing is end game, especially for streamers who can pretty much cap out at 1080p 60, like on Twitch especially. You can't really do any better. So this is like end game max level for streaming, and it's just in general, incredible performing camera, and it's very small. Look how small this shit is without the lens on it. It's just this little body with this huge lens. But again, the lens is a big deal. Okay, so that's the end game streaming Sony A6400 camera. You don't have to spend any more. It's not going to get any better.